My chosen one, something is happening to you right now that most people will never understand. And if you ignore this message, you may continue living under an influence you were never meant to carry. There is a war, and it is not outside you. It is inside your mind. Yes, at this very moment, there is a silent, invisible attack unfolding within your thoughts. It does not knock before entering. It does not announce itself. It slips in quietly, disguising itself as your own voice, your own reasoning, your own feelings. And that is what makes it so dangerous. Because when the attack sounds like you don't fight it, you believe it. Have you noticed those sudden thoughts that don't match who you truly are? Those moments when your mind fills with fear, doubt, or heaviness without any clear reason. One minute you feel stable, and the next, something shifts. A strange pressure, a quiet negativity, a whisper that says, "You're not enough, something is wrong, you will fail." That is not random. That is not just your imagination. That is a targeted disruption, and it is stronger than you think. But listen closely, because this is where the truth begins to break through the illusion. You are not defenseless. Standing in the unseen realm, watching over you with unwavering strength, is Archangel Michael, the warrior of divine light, the protector against unseen forces, the one who has been assigned to guard you in battles you didn't even know you were fighting. And right now, he is guiding this very moment. He wants you to wake up not in fear, but in awareness. Because the moment you become aware of the attack, it loses its greatest weapon, deception. You see, the greatest trick played against you is not the thought itself, it is the belief that the thought is yours. Let that sink in. Not every voice in your mind belongs to you. Some are planted to weaken your confidence. Some are sent to drain your energy. Some are designed to disconnect you from your purpose, to keep you distracted, confused, and small. And the more you accept them without question, the stronger they become. But something is changing right now. You are no longer asleep to it. You are beginning to notice. That uneasy feeling, that inner conflict, that sense that something isn't quite right. It has been trying to get your attention for a long time. And now, finally, you are listening. This is not coincidence. This is awakening. Archangel Michael is revealing a truth that only a few are ready to hear. The intensity of the attack on your mind is directly connected to the power within you. You are not being targeted because you are weak. You are being targeted because you are strong, because there is something within you that threatens the darkness, something that was never meant to stay hidden. And that is why the pressure feels so real. That is why the thoughts feel so convincing. But here is what you must remember. No matter how strong the attack feels, it is not stronger than you. It only appears that way when you are unaware. Because once you see it, once you recognize that not every thought deserves your trust, you begin to take your power back. And that is exactly what is happening right now. You are waking up to the truth. You are beginning to separate yourself from the noise. You are realizing that your mind was never meant to be a battlefield. It was meant to be a place of clarity, peace, and divine connection. But to reclaim that, you must understand how the attack enters in the first place. Because once you see the doorway, you can close it forever. And when you do, everything changes. Tell me, are you ready to go deeper into this revelation? Listen closely, because what you are about to understand may completely change the way you see your own thoughts forever. The attack on your mind does not begin with something obvious. It does not arrive like a storm that you can clearly see coming. Instead, it begins quietly, almost invisibly, through small openings that seem harmless at first. These are the silent entry points, and if you do not recognize them, they will continue to give access to forces that were never meant to influence you. It often begins with something simple, a moment of fear. Large, overwhelming fear, but a small one. A thought like, What if things go wrong? Or what if I'm not ready? That single moment may seem insignificant, but it creates a tiny opening in your mental and spiritual defenses. And through that opening, more begins to enter. Fear is one of the most powerful gateways. It weakens your clarity. It shifts your focus away from truth and into uncertainty. And once fear is present, doubt follows closely behind. You begin questioning yourself, questioning your decisions, questioning your worth. Then comes confusion. Suddenly, things that once felt clear become clouded. You overthink. You hesitate. You feel stuck, as if something is blocking your ability to move forward. This is not accidental. This is a pattern. And the more these thoughts repeat, the more natural they begin to feel until you no longer question them at all. But here is what you must understand at a deeper level: these entry points are not just emotional, they are spiritual. There are unseen influences that study these openings. They recognize moments when your guard is down, when your energy is low, when your mind is tired. And in those moments, the attack becomes stronger. But even now, you are not alone in this. Archangel Michael stands as a guardian, watching these entry points, urging you to become aware of them. Not to fear them, but to recognize them. Because recognition is power. When you begin to notice how fear enters, you can stop it at the door. When you see how doubt tries to grow, you can cut it off before it spreads. When confusion begins to cloud your mind, you can pause and ask yourself, where is this coming from? And that question alone begins to break the cycle. There is another entry point that many people overlook, and it is emotional exhaustion. When you are drained, when you feel overwhelmed, when your mind has been running without rest, your defenses weaken. In those moments, negative thoughts do not need to fight their way in. They simply walk in unnoticed. That is why you may feel strongest one day and completely off balance the next. It is not inconsistency. It is exposure. And the more exposed you are, the easier it becomes for these patterns to repeat. But here is something powerful that Archangel Michael wants you to realize: you are not meant to live with these open doors. You are meant to guard your mind with awareness, with intention, and with spiritual strength. Every time you become aware of an entry point, you weaken the attack. Every time you question a negative thought, you reclaim authority. Every time you choose not to engage with fear, you close a door that was once open. And slowly the influence begins to lose its hold. But there is one more layer to this, something even deeper and more deceptive. Because the attack does not just enter your mind, it learns how to sound like you. And once it reaches that level, it becomes much harder to detect. That is what you must understand next. Pay attention to this, because what you are about to uncover is one of the most dangerous and deceptive aspects of the attack on your mind. It is not just that thoughts enter your mind without permission, it is that, over time, those thoughts begin to sound exactly like you. This is where the illusion becomes almost impossible to detect. You are not hearing a loud, external voice. You are not experiencing something obvious or dramatic. Instead, it feels natural, familiar. It feels like your own inner dialogue, your own reasoning, your own truth. But it is not. And that is what makes it so powerful. Have you ever had a thought that quietly told you to give up, to step back, to not try again? Not in a forceful way, but in a calm, almost logical tone. A voice that says, maybe this just isn't for you, or you're not ready yet, or it's safer if you don't take that step. It feels reasonable. It feels protective. But if you look deeper, it always leads you away from growth, away from purpose, away from strength. That is how deception works. It does not push you aggressively. It guides you slowly until you begin to agree with it. And once you agree, it gains power. Archangel Michael reveals this truth clearly. The most effective attack is not the one that frightens you, it is the one that convinces you. Because once you are convinced, you stop resisting. You begin to repeat those thoughts as if they are your own beliefs. You begin to build your identity around them. And without realizing it, you start living according to a voice that was never truly yours. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you held yourself back not because something outside stopped you, but because something inside told you not to move forward? How many opportunities have been delayed? How many decisions have been avoided simply because that inner voice created hesitation? This is not weakness. This is influence. And it is designed to feel personal. It studies your fears. It adapts to your personality. It mirrors your tone. That is why it is so difficult to separate from it. But there is a way to recognize it. The voice that is not truly yours will always carry certain patterns. It will bring limitation, not expansion. It will create fear, not clarity. It will push you toward doubt, not confidence. And most importantly, it will disconnect you from your inner peace. Because your true voice, the one aligned with truth and divine guidance, does not create chaos within you. Your true voice is steady. It is calm. Even in difficult moments, it carries a sense of direction, a quiet strength. But the deceptive voice, it creates pressure. It rushes you. It overwhelms you. It traps you in loops of overthinking. And that is how you begin to tell the difference. Archangel Michael is guiding you to slow down, to observe, to stop reacting automatically to every thought that enters your mind. Because the moment you step back and observe, you break the illusion. You begin to see that not every thought deserves your agreement. You begin to notice patterns, repeated phrases, familiar doubts that show up at the exact moments when you are about to grow, about to step forward, about to change. That is not coincidence. That is resistance. But here is the turning point. The moment you recognize that the voice is not truly yours, it begins to lose its authority. It can still speak, but it cannot control. And that is where your power begins to return. You are not here to silence every thought. You are here to choose which thoughts you accept and which ones you release. That choice is your freedom. And the more you practice that awareness, the weaker the deception becomes. The voice may still try to speak, but it will no longer sound convincing, because you will see it for what it is. And once you see it clearly, it cannot control you again. Now, if this message is reaching something deep within you, if you are starting to recognize these patterns in your own life, then this moment is not SLADUCHE AEKAPI or STYERI. It is confirmation. Type I reclaim my mind in the comments if this is speaking directly to your spirit. Blessing code 6391 is now activated over your life. And as this truth settles into your heart, understand this: you are not just breaking free for yourself. You are becoming a light for others who are still trapped in the same illusion. If you feel this message has opened your eyes, then this is your moment to take a step further. This mission is about reaching souls who are still unaware of this silent battle. When you sow into this work, you are helping truth travel further like a river that never runs dry. The word says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." And this is not just a verse. It is a living promise speaking directly to you right now. I feel led to act. I feel called to help this message reach others who need it. If that is what you are feeling in your spirit, then do not ignore it. This is a prophetic moment of alignment. Your support through Super Thanks or PayPal, available in every video description and through the QR code, becomes a seed that multiplies light in places you may never see, but heaven records it. As you give, may your mind be strengthened, your clarity restored, and your path protected. Step into this moment with faith and act now. There is something you must understand now, something that changes the entire way you interpret the pressure you have been feeling in your life. Not every mind is attacked equally, and not every person experiences the same level of internal resistance. Some people move through life with little interruption in their thoughts, while others feel constant resistance, confusion, and sudden waves of doubt right when they are about to grow. If you have ever wondered why your mind feels like a battlefield at times, the answer is not what most people assume. It is not because you are weak. It is because there is something within you that is strong. The intensity of mental resistance often reveals the depth of potential inside a person. The more aligned you are with clarity, purpose, and inner awakening, the more your mind becomes a focal point for disruption. It is as if unseen forces recognize something valuable in you and attempt to distract, delay, or distort it before it fully manifests. And that is why your thoughts sometimes feel heavier than they should. That is why certain moments of progress are followed by sudden confusion. That is why just when you begin to feel stable, something tries to pull you back into doubt. This is not random imbalance. It is targeted interference. Archangel Michael reveals something very important about this experience. When a mind begins to awaken, it becomes more noticeable in the spiritual realm. Not because it is vulnerable, but because it is active. It begins to shift, question, rise, and break patterns that once kept it contained. And anything that breaks limitation naturally attracts resistance from what wants to preserve limitation. But here is where most people misunderstand what is happening. They assume that because the resistance is strong, they must be going in the wrong direction. In truth, it is often the opposite. Resistance increases not when you are failing, but when you are approaching breakthrough. Think about it clearly. When your thoughts become more aligned with growth, something inside you begins to hesitate. When you are about to take a bold step, your mind suddenly generates doubt. When clarity is near, confusion often appears first. This is not coincidence. This is timing, and it is designed to interrupt momentum. But what you must realize is that momentum itself is powerful. Once your thoughts begin aligning with purpose, everything within and around you begins to shift. And that shift is what triggers internal opposition. It is like a system reacting to change. The stronger the change, the stronger the resistance feels. However, you are not meant to interpret resistance as a stop sign. You are meant to recognize it as a signal that something important is in motion within you. Archangel Michael stands in this moment as a reminder that you are not in this struggle by accident. The very fact that you feel resistance toward your higher path is evidence that you are not stagnant. You are moving. You are shifting. You are becoming something that your old patterns are trying to resist. And that resistance often comes through the mind first. Through thoughts that question your timing. Through emotions that create hesitation. Through internal voices that suggest you slow down or turn back. But if you observe carefully, you will notice something consistent. These thoughts rarely bring peace. They create tension instead of clarity. They create contraction instead of expansion. They make you smaller in your own perception. And that is how you begin to distinguish what is truly yours and what is not aligned with your highest direction. Your true self, your deeper awareness, does not communicate through confusion. It does not weaken you when you are closest to growth. It does not create fear when you are stepping into expansion. Instead, it brings a quiet sense of alignment, even when the path is uncertain. But resistance will always try to mimic urgency. It will try to convince you that hesitation is wisdom, that fear is caution, and that doubt is protection. And if you are not aware, you can mistake resistance for guidance. That is where many people lose momentum in their lives. Not because they are incapable, but because they misinterpret internal interference as truth. But you are beginning to see differently now. You are beginning to recognize that not every mental reaction is a reflection of reality. Some are echoes of resistance trying to preserve old patterns. Some are distortions appearing at the edge of transformation. And once you see this clearly, your relationship with your mind begins to change. You no longer obey every thought automatically. You begin to observe. You begin to question. You begin to create space between what arises in your mind and what you choose to believe. That space is where your power returns. And in that space, something deeper begins to emerge. Clarity. Not forced clarity. Not emotional clarity. But a grounded awareness that allows you to move forward without being controlled by internal noise. Because when you understand why strong minds are targeted, you stop seeing resistance as an enemy and start seeing it as confirmation that you are no longer where you used to be. And from that realization, something within you begins to settle while something even stronger begins to rise. There is a conflict happening within you that most people never learn to recognize, yet it influences nearly every decision, emotion, and thought you experience. It is not an external battle in the way people often imagine. It is not something visible in the physical world. Instead, it unfolds silently inside your consciousness, shaping how you see yourself and how you respond to life. This is the ongoing struggle between clarity and confusion, between expansion and limitation, between light and darkness operating through thought patterns. And it is far more active than you realize. At certain moments you feel aligned, focused, and clear. In those moments, your decisions feel natural, your direction feels steady, and your mind feels open. But suddenly, without warning, something shifts. Doubt begins to surface. Overthinking takes over. Emotional heaviness enters where there was once peace. It feels like a change in atmosphere inside your mind. That shift is not random. It is part of the internal battle. Archangel Michael reveals a deeper understanding of this experience. Every human being carries within them the capacity for light, which represents awareness, truth, and alignment, but also experiences moments where darkness tries to cloud that awareness through confusion, fear, and distortion of perception. This is not about labeling yourself as good or bad. It is about recognizing the forces that influence attention and thought in different directions. Light, within this understanding, is what brings you back to truth. It is the part of you that feels calm even in uncertainty, that seeks understanding rather than reaction, that allows clarity to rise even in complex situations. Darkness, on the other hand, is not simply absence. It is distortion. It takes what is already present and twists it into fear, urgency, and doubt. It does not need to create something new. It only needs to shift your perception slightly for confusion to take root. And once perception is shifted, decisions begin to follow that distortion. This is why internal battles feel so real. Because they are not always about external circumstances. They are often about how those circumstances are interpreted in the mind. You may face the same situation on different days and react completely differently depending on which internal influence is stronger in that moment. When clarity is stronger, you respond with patience and understanding. When confusion is stronger, you react with fear and hesitation. When alignment is stronger, you move forward. When distortion is stronger, you withdraw. This constant fluctuation is what creates the feeling of being pulled in different directions within yourself. But there is something important you must understand. This battle is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to reveal you. Because through this contrast, you begin to see what is truly yours and what is simply passing through your awareness. Archangel Michael reminds you that awareness itself is the turning point. The moment you become aware of the internal conflict, you are no longer fully inside it. You begin to observe it from a higher perspective. And in that observation, the intensity begins to shift. You are no longer fully identified with every thought. You are no longer completely absorbed by every emotional wave. Instead, you begin to notice patterns. You see how certain thoughts return at specific moments of vulnerability. You notice how confusion often arrives right before clarity is about to emerge. You recognize how fear tries to speak the loudest when you are closest to change. And this recognition is powerful, because once you see the pattern, it loses some of its influence. The battle between light and darkness inside you is not about eliminating one side completely. It is about learning discernment. It is about understanding which thoughts lead you toward expansion and which ones pull you into contraction. Expansion feels like openness even when uncertain. Contraction feels like restriction, even when it tries to present itself as safety. And the more you observe this difference, the more your inner compass begins to strengthen. You stop reacting automatically. You begin responding consciously. You pause before accepting every thought as truth. You create space between stimulus and response. In that space, clarity begins to rise naturally. And over time, something shifts within you. The influence of confusion does not disappear entirely, but it becomes less dominant. It loses authority. It becomes background noise instead of direction. Meanwhile, clarity becomes more recognizable, more stable, more consistent. This is how balance begins to form within the mind, not through force, not through resistance, but through awareness. And as you continue to develop this awareness, you begin to understand something profound. You were never meant to be controlled by either side. You were meant to observe, to discern, and to choose. And that choice, made repeatedly over time, becomes the foundation of inner freedom. There is a belief most people carry without even questioning it, and it quietly shapes the way they experience their entire inner world. It is the belief that they are fully in control of their thoughts, that every idea, every judgment, every emotional reaction that appears in the mind is something they consciously create and fully own. But what if that is not entirely true? What if the mind is far more active, far more layered, and far more influenced than you have been led to believe? Because when you begin to observe carefully, you notice something unsettling. Thoughts appear on their own. Emotions rise without invitation. Sudden fears, sudden doubts, sudden memories, sudden scenarios all emerge without any conscious decision. And yet, most people still assume, this is me. This is my thinking. This assumption is where the illusion begins. The illusion of control does not mean you have no influence over your mind. It means you may not be fully aware of how much of your mental activity is automatic, conditioned, and influenced by patterns beneath your conscious awareness. And when awareness is missing, influence feels like identity. Archangel Michael reveals a deeper truth here. Not every mental movement originates from your highest self. Some arise from fear-based conditioning, some from emotional memory, and some from subtle influences that attempt to distort perception when awareness is low. This does not mean you are powerless. It means you are being invited to become conscious of what you previously accepted unconsciously. Think about how often your mind reacts before you even have time to respond. A situation happens, and immediately a thought follows. Sometimes that thought is calm and grounded, but other times it is reactive, emotional, or fearful. And in many cases, you do not even question it. You simply follow it. That automatic following is where control feels real, but is actually incomplete. Because true control is not about preventing thoughts from arising. It is about recognizing them before they shape your decisions. There is a difference between having a thought and being governed by a thought. And most internal struggle begins when that difference is not seen clearly. When a thought appears that says you are not ready, or this will fail, or you should step back, it may feel like guidance. It may even feel like wisdom. But if you examine it closely, you will notice something important. It often arrives before clarity has had a chance to form. It interrupts potential before it becomes action. And this interruption creates the illusion that the thought is protecting you, when in reality, it may be limiting you. The mind is powerful, but it is also pattern. It repeats what it has learned. It replays what it has experienced. It predicts based on past emotional data. And when those patterns are not observed consciously, they begin to feel like absolute truth. But truth is not always what the mind repeats. Archangel Michael encourages a different kind of awareness, one where you begin to see thoughts as events rather than commands. In this awareness, you no longer merge with every mental voice. You begin to witness them. And in witnessing, something shifts. You realize that you are the observer of thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. This is where the illusion of control begins to break. Because when you believe you are your thoughts, every negative thought feels like truth. Every fearful idea feels like reality. Every doubt feels like identity. But when you step into awareness, you begin to see that thoughts are temporary. They come and go. They rise and fall. They change depending on your emotional and mental state. And something that changes cannot define what is permanent within you. Still, the illusion is strong because it is familiar. It has been reinforced over time. It hath been accepted without question. So when a strong emotional thought appears, it can feel overwhelming, even absolute. But awareness creates space. And in that space, you begin to respond differently. Instead of immediately believing a thought, you begin to pause. Instead of reacting, you begin to observe. Instead of accepting fear as truth, you begin to question its origin. Where did this thought come from? Why is it appearing now? Does it reflect reality, or does it reflect a past pattern? These questions begin to dissolve the automatic grip of mental influence. And slowly, you begin to experience something new. A sense of inner distance from your thoughts. Not disconnection, but clarity. Not suppression, but understanding. And in that clarity, you realize something profound. Control was never about eliminating thoughts. It was about no longer being controlled by them. This is the beginning of mental freedom. There are moments in life when everything looks normal on the outside, yet something feels deeply unsettled within your mind. You cannot always explain it clearly. You cannot always point to a specific cause, but you feel it, a shift in your inner state, a heaviness in your thoughts, a subtle distortion in your clarity. And if you have been experiencing this more often than usual, it is important that you do not ignore it. Because there are signs, very specific signs, that your mind is under a level of influence and disturbance that goes beyond ordinary stress or overthinking. The first sign is sudden mental confusion that appears without a clear reason. You may wake up feeling fine, but within a short time your thoughts become scattered. Decisions that once felt simple now feel complicated. Even small choices begin to feel heavy. This is not normal mental fatigue. This is a disruption of clarity that creates hesitation where there should be flow. The second sign is emotional imbalance that seems disconnected from your external reality. Nothing major has changed in your life, yet your emotional state feels unstable. One moment you feel okay, and the next moment you feel doubt, fear, or sadness without a clear trigger. This instability is not random. It is often a sign that your mental field is being influenced in a way that distorts emotional perception. The third sign is repetitive negative thinking that feels difficult to stop. These thoughts may revolve around failure, fear of the future, or self-doubt. What makes this particularly powerful is not just the content of the thoughts, but their persistence. They return again and again, even when you try to move away from them. It feels like your mind is stuck in loops that you did not consciously choose. The fourth sign is loss of inner motivation. Things that once inspired you begin to feel distant or unimportant. Your vision becomes blurry. Your drive weakens. You may still know what you want, but something inside you resists moving toward it. This resistance often feels like tiredness, but deeper than physical exhaustion. It is a mental withdrawal from purpose. The fifth sign is over-identification with fear-based thoughts. Instead of seeing fear as a passing mental state, you begin to believe it as truth. Thoughts like "I cannot do this" or "something will go wrong" feel more real than possibility itself. This is where perception becomes distorted, because fear begins to guide interpretation instead of awareness. And the sixth sign is isolation within your own mind. Even when surrounded by people, you feel disconnected internally. Your thoughts feel louder than the world around you. You may appear present, but internally you are caught in mental noise that makes it difficult to feel grounded or centered. These signs do not mean you are broken. They do not mean you are weak. They do not mean something is wrong with your identity. They are signals. Signals that your inner awareness is being challenged by layers of mental interference that attempt to cloud clarity and disrupt alignment. And this is where understanding becomes extremely important. Archangel Michael reveals a truth that many overlook. When the mind is under disturbance, it is not meant to be feared. It is meant to be recognized. Because recognition is the first step toward separation. The moment you see a pattern clearly, you are no longer fully inside of it. When you are unaware, you are absorbed by the experience. But when awareness enters, distance is created. And in that distance, influence begins to weaken. This is why these signs matter. Not to create fear, but to awaken discernment. Because without discernment, every thought feels like truth. Every emotion feels like direction. Every internal wave feels like identity. But with discernment, you begin to separate yourself from what is passing through you. You start to realize that just because a thought appears does not mean it is accurate. Just because an emotion rises does not mean it defines your reality. Just because confusion shows up does not mean clarity is gone. It simply means your awareness is being tested. And in this testing, something important is being developed within you. Strength of observation. You begin to watch your thoughts instead of becoming them. You begin to notice emotional shifts without immediately reacting. You begin to recognize patterns instead of being controlled by them. And slowly, something changes in your inner experience. The intensity does not immediately disappear, but your relationship with it transforms. You are no longer fully inside the storm. You are observing it from a place of increasing awareness. And that shift is powerful, because what once felt overwhelming begins to feel understandable, and what is understood begins to lose its power to control. Archangel Michael stands with you in this awareness, reminding you that clarity is not something that must be forced. It is something that returns when distortion is no longer accepted as truth. And as you begin to see these signs clearly, you are already stepping into a different level of awareness, one where the mind is no longer blindly followed, but consciously understood. And that understanding is what prepares you for protection, strength, and restoration of inner clarity. There comes a moment in every awakening where awareness alone is not enough. Understanding the attack on your mind is powerful, but without protection, awareness can still feel overwhelming. That is why you must learn how to actively shield your mind, not in fear, but in authority. Because once you see how thoughts enter, how they distort, and how they influence perception, the next step is not panic, it is protection. And protection begins with how you respond in the exact moment a thought appears. Most people lose control not because thoughts are powerful, but because they respond automatically. A fear appears and they accept it. A doubt appears and they believe it. A negative scenario appears and they emotionally enter it. This automatic response is what strengthens mental disturbance. But the moment you interrupt that reaction, everything begins to change. Archangel Michael reveals something very important here. Protection of the mind is not about stopping thoughts from arriving, but about refusing to give them authority when they arrive. That distinction is everything. The first step in shielding your mind is immediate recognition. When a thought enters that feels heavy, fearful, or confusing, do not merge with it. Instead, pause internally and recognize it as an event passing through awareness, not a command you must follow. The simple act of recognition begins to weaken its influence. The second step is detachment. This does not mean suppression or denial. It means creating space between you and the thought. Instead of saying, "This is happening to me," you begin to say internally, "This is a thought passing through my awareness." That shift alone reduces emotional intensity and restores clarity. The third step is redirection. Once you have recognized and detached, you consciously shift your attention. Not by force, but by choice. You bring your focus back to something grounded, your breath, your surroundings, or a task that reconnects you with the present moment. This breaks the loop that mental interference tries to create. The fourth step is energetic alignment. This is where you consciously choose what you allow to influence your inner state. You remind yourself that not every thought deserves space. Not every fear deserves attention. Not every doubt deserves engagement. You begin to select what aligns with peace and release what disturbs it. This is how mental shielding begins to form. At first, it may feel difficult because old patterns resist change. The mind may attempt to pull you back into overthinking or emotional reaction. But every time you do not engage, something shifts. The pattern weakens. The influence loses intensity. And over time, your mind begins to learn a new response. Instead of automatic reaction, there is conscious observation. Instead of emotional absorption, there is awareness. Instead of confusion, there is space. This space is your protection. Because within that space, influence cannot fully take hold. Archangel Michael reminds you that true protection is not external. It is internal mastery of attention. What you focus on, you empower. What you observe without reaction, you disarm. That is why shielding your mind is not about fighting thoughts. It is about refusing to feed the ones that distort your clarity. There is also something deeper that strengthens this protection. It is the practice of returning to stillness throughout your day. Not long periods of isolation, but small moments of inner pause. Even a few seconds of conscious stillness can reset the mental field and interrupt negative momentum. In these moments, you are not trying to fix your thoughts. You are simply stepping out of identification with them. And in that stepping out, you begin to remember something important. You are not the storm. You are the awareness witnessing it. Another important part of shielding your mind is understanding timing. Many mental disturbances intensify when you are tired, overwhelmed, or emotionally drained. In those moments, your mind is more receptive to negative patterns. This is why rest, grounding, and emotional balance are not just physical needs, they are part of mental protection. When you are stable internally, external influence loses entry points. And as you continue practicing these steps, something begins to change quietly but powerfully. The thoughts do not disappear completely, but they lose authority. They no longer feel like commands. They begin to feel like background noise. And in that shift, your clarity returns more consistently. You begin to feel a sense of space inside your mind that was not accessible before. That space is where peace grows. That space is where clarity stabilizes. And that space is where your true awareness begins to lead again. Archangel Michael stands with you in this process, reminding you that every time you choose awareness over reaction, you are strengthening a shield that cannot be easily broken. And as this shield forms within you, something powerful begins to happen. You are no longer just noticing the attack on your mind. You are no longer just understanding it. You are beginning to rise above it. There is something you must understand now that changes everything about this entire experience you have been going through. Awareness itself is not passive. It is not just observation. It is your first and most powerful weapon against the attack on your mind. Because the moment awareness enters a thought pattern, that pattern is no longer operating in full darkness. And anything that is no longer hidden begins to lose control over you. Most people assume they need to fight their thoughts in order to be free. But the truth is far more subtle and far more powerful than resistance. You do not defeat mental interference by force. You dissolve it through awareness. And this is where everything begins to shift. Archangel Michael reveals a profound truth here. Darkness does not survive direct awareness. It survives only in unconsciousness, in automatic reaction, and in unobserved repetition. The moment you bring conscious attention to a thought pattern without fear, without engagement, and without identification, its structure begins to weaken. This is why awareness is considered the beginning of liberation, because awareness creates separation, and separation creates freedom. When a thought appears in your mind, you are given a choice, even if it does not feel like it at first. You can either become the thought or you can observe it. And most suffering begins when people unknowingly become the thought. A single idea appears, and suddenly it is no longer an idea. It becomes identity. A moment of fear arises, and suddenly it is no longer an emotion. It becomes reality. A wave of doubt appears, and suddenly it is no longer temporary. It becomes truth. But awareness interrupts this automatic merging. It allows you to say internally, "I see this happening." And that simple recognition changes your entire internal structure. Because what you see clearly, you no longer unconsciously obey. This is where the first real shift in power occurs. Instead of reacting immediately to thoughts, you begin to witness them. Instead of being pulled into emotional momentum, you begin to pause. Instead of accepting mental noise as truth, you begin to question its origin. And in that questioning, clarity begins to emerge naturally. It is important to understand that awareness does not remove thoughts instantly. It does not silence the mind permanently. Instead, it changes your relationship with what appears in the mind. Before awareness, every thought feels like a command. After awareness, thoughts become temporary events passing through a larger field of observation. And that field is you. Not the thinking mind, but the awareness behind it. Archangel Michael guides this realization gently, but firmly. You are not meant to be controlled by every mental movement. You are meant to witness, discern, and choose your alignment consciously. And the more you practice awareness, the more you begin to notice something remarkable. The intensity of mental disturbance begins to decrease, not because thoughts disappear, but because their influence weakens when they are observed without fear or engagement. This is the paradox most people do not understand. What you resist grows stronger. What you observe without resistance begins to lose strength, because resistance feeds energy into the pattern, but awareness withdraws that energy. And when energy is withdrawn, the pattern cannot sustain itself in the same way. This is why awareness is considered your first weapon. It does not attack. It does not fight. It does not struggle. It simply reveals. And in revelation, illusion begins to collapse. As you continue developing this awareness, you will begin to notice a gap forming between thought and reaction. In that gap, something powerful exists: choice. Before, there was only automatic response. Now, there is space. And in that space, you can choose whether to follow a thought or release it. This is where inner strength begins to grow. Because strength is not measured by how few thoughts you have, but by how little control those thoughts have over your direction. Over time, awareness becomes more natural. You do not have to force it as much. You begin to catch thoughts earlier. You recognize patterns faster. You feel emotional shifts without being fully absorbed by them. And slowly, your mind becomes less like a battlefield and more like an open space where clarity can return. Archangel Michael reminds you in this stage that awareness is not something you achieve once. It is something you return to again and again until it becomes your natural state. And as this state stabilizes within you, something begins to transform quietly. You are no longer reacting to life from confusion. You are responding from clarity. And that is the beginning of true mental freedom. There is a truth that may feel uncomfortable at first, but once you understand it deeply, it completely changes the way you interpret everything you have been going through. The intensity of internal struggle is not always a sign of weakness. In many cases, it is a sign of significance. Not everyone experiences the same level of mental resistance, not because life is unfair, but because different levels of awareness attract different levels of opposition within the mind. And when your mind begins to awaken, question, and rise beyond old limitations, something within you begins to shift in a way that does not go unnoticed internally. This is where many people misinterpret your experience. They think, if I am struggling this much internally, something must be wrong with me. But what if the struggle itself is evidence that something is being activated within you? What if the pressure you feel is not meant to destroy you, but to reveal that you are moving beyond where you used to be mentally and spiritually? Archangel Michael reveals a perspective that changes this entire narrative. Resistance often increases in direct proportion to inner expansion. When a person begins to break free from old patterns of fear, limitation, and unconscious thinking, the mind does not always transition smoothly. Instead, it often produces resistance in the form of doubt, confusion, and emotional instability. Not because you are going backward, but because something within you is no longer fully aligned with your old mental structure. And when old structures begin to lose control, they resist being replaced. This is why the attack on your mind can feel stronger at the exact moments when you are becoming more aware. It is not a contradiction. It is a reaction to growth, a reaction to awakening, a reaction to change that cannot be easily reversed. Think about it clearly. When your thoughts begin to shift toward clarity, something inside you may suddenly question everything. When you start to trust yourself more, doubt may increase temporarily. When you begin to feel stronger emotionally, internal noise may become louder. This does not mean you are failing. It means you are transitioning. And transitions are rarely silent. They are often accompanied by disruption before stability is restored. But here is what you must recognize deeply. Not every disturbance is a sign of danger. Some disturbances are signs of restructuring. Your mind is not only being influenced, it is also being restructured through awareness. Old thought patterns that once dominated your perception are being challenged. And when they are challenged, they attempt to reassert themselves through mental pressure. That pressure can feel overwhelming if you believe it defines you. But if you understand it correctly, it becomes confirmation that change is already happening. This is where perception becomes critical. If you interpret resistance as failure, you will retreat. If you interpret resistance as confirmation, you will continue forward. And this difference determines whether you remain stuck in old mental cycles or move beyond them. Archangel Michael reminds you that what you are experiencing is not random instability. It is the natural friction that occurs when awareness begins dissolving unconscious control patterns. And that is why this experience feels so personal, because it is happening at the level of identity, perception, and inner structure. It feels like a battle because something in you is no longer willing to accept the same limitations that once felt normal. And when limitation is no longer accepted, it does not leave quietly. He resists. But here is the deeper truth within all of this. You are not being targeted because you are breaking down. You are experiencing resistance because you are breaking through. There is a difference between collapse and emergence. Collapse leads to disorientation without direction. Emergence leads to temporary confusion followed by increasing clarity. And if you observe carefully, you will notice that despite the mental noise, something within you is beginning to see differently. You are questioning more. You are observing more. You are becoming less automatically reactive to thoughts that once controlled your emotional state. That shift alone is evidence of emergence. Because unconscious patterns do not like being observed. They lose strength under awareness. And as they weaken, your perception begins to stabilize in a new way. You are no longer fully identified with every passing thought. You are beginning to recognize that there is something within you that is separate from the mental fluctuations. That recognition is powerful, because it means you are no longer completely inside the system of influence. You are beginning to step outside of it. And from that perspective, everything changes. You begin to see that the intensity of mental resistance was never proof of your weakness. It was evidence that something within you refuses to stay asleep. And once you understand that deeply, the struggle begins to transform into meaning, and meaning becomes strength. There comes a moment in every inner struggle when something subtle begins to shift, not in the outer world, but inside your awareness. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. But it is undeniable once it happens. It is the moment you stop believing every thought that enters your mind. Up until this point, thoughts may have felt automatic, persuasive, even authoritative. Fear appeared and you followed it. Doubt appeared and you questioned yourself. Confusion appeared and you slowed down. It felt like your mind was leading you through life without your permission. But now something different begins to emerge. A pause. A space between thought and reaction. And in that space, control begins to return. This is the turning point. Not because the mind has stopped producing thoughts, but because you have stopped surrendering to them unconsciously. Archangel Michael reveals that true inner control is not about eliminating mental activity, but about reclaiming authority over what you identify with. The mind will continue to generate patterns, memories, predictions, and emotional echoes. That is its nature. But you are no longer required to obey every signal it produces. And this realization changes everything. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. The mind might still try to pull you into old reactions. A thought arises, and for a moment, the old pattern tries to take over. But instead of immediately following it, you notice it. You observe it. And in that observation, something new happens. You do not react. You choose. And that choice, even if small at first, is the beginning of freedom. Because control is not a sudden takeover. It is a series of small conscious interruptions where awareness overrides automatic reaction. Each time you do this, something within the mind recalibrates. The old patterns begin to lose intensity. Not because they disappear instantly, but because they are no longer being reinforced with unconscious attention. This is how inner authority is restored. And as this process continues, you begin to notice that certain thoughts no longer affect you the way they used to. The same fear that once overwhelmed you now feels distant. The same doubt that once stopped you now feels less convincing. The same confusion that once dominated your attention now feels more like background noise. This is not because life has changed externally. It is because your relationship with your thoughts has changed internally. You are no longer merging with every mental movement. You are no longer identifying every thought as truth. You are beginning to see thoughts as temporary formations within awareness. And that shift creates stability. But this is also the stage where old patterns may try one last time to reassert control. You may notice moments where the mind becomes louder before it becomes quieter, where confusion intensifies briefly before clarity stabilizes, where doubt surfaces more clearly before it dissolves. This is not regression. It is the final resistance of an old system losing influence. And if you remain aware during these moments, something powerful happens. You do not feed the cycle anymore. You do not reinforce the pattern. You simply observe it without engagement. And observation without engagement leads to dissolution. Archangel Michael reminds you that this is where many people unknowingly regain their power without realizing it. They think they are still struggling, but in reality, they are already disengaging from the very patterns that once controlled them. Because the moment you stop reacting automatically, the structure of mental influence begins to collapse. And what replaces it is not emptiness but clarity. A quiet sense of inner stability that does not depend on external conditions or passing thoughts. You begin to notice that even in moments of uncertainty, there is something within you that remains steady. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer fully identified with instability. That is the beginning of mastery. And mastery is not perfection. It is awareness in motion. It is the ability to remain conscious while thoughts arise and emotions shift. You stop asking, "Why is my mind doing this to me?" and begin asking, "How am I responding to what my mind is doing?" That question alone marks a profound shift, because it moves you from victim of thought to observer of thought, from reaction to response, from confusion to clarity. And as this continues, something very important becomes clear. You were never meant to control every thought. You were meant to reclaim your relationship with them. And in doing so, you reclaim yourself. And now you have arrived at a deeper place within yourself, even if it does not feel fully complete yet. Something inside you has shifted through everything you have understood, and that shift is not something that can be undone easily. Because once awareness is awakened, it does not go back to sleep the same way again. There may still be thoughts. There may still be moments of doubt or emotional waves trying to rise, but they no longer carry the same authority they once did. Something within you has learned to see differently, to pause, to observe, to separate truth from distortion. And in that separation, peace slowly begins to return. Not as a loud feeling, but as a quiet stability underneath everything else. This is what inner protection truly feels like. It is not the absence of thoughts. It is the presence of awareness that is stronger than the thoughts themselves. Archangel Michael stands with you in this state of realization, not as a distant figure, but as a reminder that clarity is always available when you return to awareness. The mind may continue to move, but you are no longer lost inside its movement. You are no longer fully pulled into every wave of emotion or every passing idea. You are beginning to rest in something deeper than thought. And in that resting, protection is already active. Because what you understand clearly can no longer control you in the same way. The patterns that once felt overwhelming now feel recognizable. And what is recognizable becomes less powerful over your inner state. There is a quiet strength forming within you now. Not the kind that shouts or forces change, but the kind that remains steady even when the mind is active. The kind of strength that does not collapse under pressure, because it is no longer built on reaction. It is built on awareness. And awareness does not break easily. As you move forward from this moment, remember this: your mind is not your enemy. It is a space where influence and awareness both move, but only one of them needs your identification. When you stop identifying with every thought, you stop giving away your inner authority. And slowly, life begins to feel less like a battle and more like observation, understanding, and choice. You may notice that even when confusion tries to return, it no longer defines your direction. Even when fear appears, it no longer fully shapes your perception. Even when doubt speaks, it no longer becomes your identity. This is peace returning in layers, and each layer is built on awareness that you have now begun to strengthen within yourself. Archangel Michael reminds you in this final moment that you are not walking away from this message the same way you entered it. Something has been activated within your perception. Not something external, but something internal that now allows you to see your thoughts differently. And that is protection. Because once you see clearly, you cannot easily be deceived the same way again. As you continue your journey, carry this understanding gently, but firmly. You are not at the mercy of every thought that appears. You are the awareness in which those thoughts appear. And that awareness is steady, even when the mind is not. Peace does not come from silence alone. It comes from understanding. And now that understanding has begun to take root within you. Before you go, if this message has reached something deep inside your awareness, take a moment and acknowledge it. Type "I am under divine protection" in the comments if you felt this awakening within you. Blessing code 8847 has now been released over your mind and spirit. And if you feel called in your heart, I want to speak to you directly. This message is part of a larger mission to awaken and protect minds from unseen confusion and bring clarity where there has been mental struggle. If this truth has brought light into your awareness, then you are already part of that mission in spirit. When you choose to support this work through Super Thanks or PayPal, found in every video description and QR code, you are not just giving. You are helping this light reach minds still trapped in confusion and silence. As you give, may your mind remain clear, your thoughts remain protected, and your path remain aligned with peace. May every seed you sow return to you as clarity, strength, and divine stability. This is not just support, it is alignment with a higher calling. Now step forward in peace, knowing this truth within you cannot be easily shaken again.